The stagecoach lurched to a stop in a cloud of dust, and Eleanor Whitmore clutched her worn carpetbag tighter against her chest. Through the small window, she could see the desolate main street of Redemption, Montana, a collection of weathered wooden buildings that looked ready to collapse under the weight of the harsh winter wind. Her fingers trembled as they traced the crumpled advertisement in her pocket. The one that had promised a respectable marriage to a rancher named Howard Cartwright. She'd fled Philadelphia 3 weeks ago with nothing but the clothes on her back and her grandmother's silver locket, escaping a father who'd tried to sell her to his gambling creditors. Now, standing on this dusty street at 23 years old, she wondered if she'd traded one prison for another. The stage driver opened the door, and Eleanor stepped down on unsteady legs. Her modest gray traveling dress was covered in dust, her dark auburn hair escaping its pins after days of travel. She scanned the street for Mr. Cartwright, her future husband, a man she'd never seen except in the faded photograph he'd sent. A portly gentleman with kind eyes, or so she'd hoped. Before we continue with Eleanor's journey, I'd love to ask you to take a moment to subscribe to our channel and give this video a like. Your support truly means everything to us and motivates us to bring you more quality stories like this one. Also, I'm curious, where are you listening to this story from? Please let us know in the comments below. Miss Whitmore? A gruff voice called from behind her. Eleanor turned to find a man who was decidedly not Howard Cartwright. He stood well over 6 feet tall, with broad shoulders that filled out his sheepskin coat. His face was weathered and angular, with a strong jaw shadowed by several days' worth of stubble. But it was his eyes that captured her, a striking gray blue, like a winter sky, filled with something she couldn't quite name. Sorrow, perhaps, or resignation. "I'm Eleanor Whitmore, yes," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm looking for Mr. Howard Cartwright. I'm to be his bride." The man's jaw tightened, and he removed his hat, revealing thick, dark brown hair. "I'm James Cartwright, Howard's brother. I'm afraid I have difficult news, Miss Whitmore." He paused, his eyes filled with genuine compassion. "Howard passed away 2 weeks ago. Pneumonia took him fast." The ground seemed to tilt beneath Eleanor's feet. The little money she'd had was gone, spent on the journey west. She had no family to return to, no prospects, nothing. She swayed, and James's strong hand caught her elbow, steadying her. "Easy now," he said gently. "When's the last time you ate?" Eleanor couldn't remember. A day ago? 2? She'd been rationing the dried biscuits in her bag, making them last. I'm fine, Mr. Cartwright." "No, you're not." His voice was firm, but not unkind. He picked up her carpetbag with one hand, keeping his other hand under her elbow. "Come on. The ranch is an hour's ride. We'll get some food in you, and then we'll figure out what comes next." "I have no money to pay you," Eleanor said, her pride warring with her desperation. She fumbled with the clasp of her grandmother's locket. "But I have this. It's real silver. Perhaps you could—" "Keep it," James interrupted, his voice rough. "I don't want your silver, Miss Whitmore. What I need is someone who can cook a decent meal and keep a house from falling into complete disorder. I've been managing alone since Howard took ill, and I'm no good at either." He helped her toward a waiting horse and wagon. "You need a place to stay. I need help. Seems like we might be able to help each other, at least for now." Eleanor studied his face, searching for deception or ulterior motives, but found only honesty and a bone-deep weariness. "Just household help?" "Just household help," he confirmed, meeting her eyes directly. You'll have your own room. No expectations beyond honest work. And Miss Whitmore? He waited until she looked at him. Out here, a woman's word is her bond. Same as a man's. You're not property. You're a person, and you'll be treated as such under my roof. Something in Eleanor's chest loosened slightly. She nodded and allowed him to help her into the wagon. The ride to the Cartwright Ranch was quiet, with James pointing out landmarks occasionally. The creek that ran year-round, the stand of cottonwoods that marked the northern boundary of his land, the mountains rising, purple and majestic in the distance. The ranch itself was modest but well-maintained, a sturdy log house with a covered porch, a large barn, corrals holding several horses, and endless stretches of grassland rolling toward the horizon. It's not much, James said as he helped her down from the wagon, but it's honest land. Howard and I built most of it with our own hands. The house was clean, but Spartan inside. Rough-hewn furniture, a stone fireplace, and windows that let in the fading afternoon light. James showed her to a small bedroom with a simple bed covered in a faded quilt. This was going to be... He stopped, clearing his throat. This was prepared for you, for Howard's bride. It's yours now, for as long as you need it. Eleanor set down her carpetbag and turned to face him. Why are you being kind to me, Mr. Cartwright? You don't know me. James was silent for a long moment, his eyes distant. I lost my wife 3 years ago. Catherine. Childbirth took them both, her and our son. His voice was raw with old pain. I know what it's like to have nowhere to go, nothing to hold on to. I wouldn't wish that on anyone. I'm sorry, Eleanor whispered, understanding flooding through her. They were both survivors of different tragedies, trying to find solid ground. Get some rest, James said, already turning toward the door. We'll talk more in the morning. But Eleanor called after him. Mr. Cartwright, thank you for seeing me as more than what I was meant to be. He nodded once, then disappeared down the hallway. The days that followed fell into a rhythm. Eleanor rose before dawn to prepare breakfast. Flapjacks, bacon, strong coffee that James claimed was the best he'd tasted in years. She cleaned the house, mended his shirts, and tended the small vegetable garden that had been neglected. James worked the ranch from sunup to sundown, managing the cattle and horses that were his livelihood. They were polite strangers, sharing space, nothing more. Until the afternoon, James found her struggling to carry water from the well. You're going to hurt yourself, he said, taking the heavy buckets from her hands. I can manage, Eleanor protested, but her arms were shaking. I can see that, James said dryly, but there's no shame in accepting help. He studied her for a moment. You ever ridden a horse, Miss Whitmore? Eleanor shook her head. In Philadelphia, she'd only ever traveled by carriage. Can't live out here without knowing how to ride, James said. Tomorrow morning, after breakfast, I'll teach you. The next day, James brought a gentle mare named Daisy to the corral. Eleanor approached nervously, her modest blue calico dress dusty from the morning's housework. First lesson, James said, his voice patient. Always let the horse see you coming. Speak soft. Let her know you're a friend. He demonstrated, running his hand down Daisy's neck. Now you try. Eleanor reached out tentatively, and Daisy's warm breath huffed against her palm. Something about the animal's gentle nature eased her fear. Good, James said. Now, getting on is the tricky part. Put your left foot in the stirrup, grab the horn, and swing your right leg over. I'll help steady you. Eleanor did as instructed, and suddenly James's hands were on her waist, strong and warm, lifting her effortlessly into the saddle. The contact lasted only seconds, but Eleanor felt heat rush to her cheeks. She was grateful he couldn't see her face as he adjusted the stirrups. "How does it feel?" James asked, looking up at her. "Terrifying," Eleanor admitted with a small laugh, "but also wonderful." Something shifted in James's expression, the ghost of a smile. "You'll do fine. Just remember, the horse can feel what you're feeling. Stay calm. Stay confident." Over the following weeks, the riding lessons continued. James taught her to guide Daisy with gentle pressure from her legs, how to post in the saddle, how to read the animal's mood. He was endlessly patient, never mocking her mistakes. "You're a natural," he said one morning as Eleanor successfully navigated Daisy through a series of barrels he'd set up. Catherine was scared of horses her whole life, never could get comfortable in the saddle. It was the first time he'd spoken his late wife's name without that raw edge of pain, and Eleanor felt privileged to witness it. "Tell me about her," Eleanor said softly, as they walked the horses back to the barn. James was quiet for so long that Eleanor thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "She was small, like you. Dark hair, though, and brown eyes. Laughed at everything, even my terrible jokes. She wanted a house full of children." His voice caught. "We only got the one chance." "I'm sure she knew how much you loved her," Eleanor said. "I hope so," James replied. "I promised her I'd never let anyone else in. Seemed like the right thing to do at the time, protecting that space where she'd been." He glanced at Eleanor. "But maybe that's not what she would have wanted. Maybe she'd have wanted me to keep living." Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them, an acknowledgement that they were both emerging from their own private darkness. That night, Eleanor couldn't sleep. She stood on the porch in her nightgown with a shawl wrapped around her shoulders, watching the stars spread like diamond dust across the black sky. The ranch was peaceful. The only sounds, the distant lowing of cattle and the whisper of wind through grass. "Can't sleep either?" James's voice came from the shadows. Eleanor started, but didn't retreat. "Too much on my mind." James stepped into the moonlight. He'd removed his shirt, and Eleanor could see the breadth of his chest, the muscles earned from hard labor, and a long scar that ran from his shoulder to his ribs. "What happened?" she asked, nodding toward the scar. "Angry bull, 3 years back," James said. "Gored me pretty good. Howard patched me up, but it was close." He leaned against the porch railing. "What's keeping you awake, Miss Whitmore?" "Eleanor," she corrected softly. "After all this time, I think you can call me Eleanor." "Eleanor," he repeated, and her name sounded different in his deep voice, almost like a caress. "So what's troubling you, Eleanor?" She hesitated, then decided on honesty. "I'm afraid. Afraid of going back to what I was running from. Afraid of staying here and becoming a burden. Afraid of—" She stopped, unable to voice the deepest fear, that she was starting to feel something for this quiet, wounded man that went far beyond gratitude. James moved closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his skin. "You're not a burden. You've brought life back to this place. I hadn't realized how dead everything felt until you arrived." "James," Eleanor whispered, and then his hand was reaching up. His calloused fingers gentle as they tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "Tell me to stop," he said, his voice rough with want and restraint. "Tell me you don't feel this thing between us, and I'll step back. I'll never mention it again." But Eleanor couldn't, because she did feel it, the pull, the connection, the way her heart raced whenever he was near. The young mail-order bride was modest before everyone, always proper, always restrained. But her desire that night was greater than her fear, greater than her caution. "I can't tell you that," she said, her voice barely audible, "because it wouldn't be true." James's eyes darkened, and he leaned closer, his breath warm against her lips. "I don't want to rush you. I don't want you to feel—" "James," Eleanor interrupted, placing her hand on his bare chest, feeling his heart hammering beneath her palm. "I'm not afraid of you. I'm only afraid of how much I want this." He kissed her then, gentle at first, tentative, as if she might shatter. But Eleanor rose on her toes, pressing closer, and the kiss deepened. His arms came around her, one hand splaying across her back, the other tangling in her hair. She could taste the coffee he'd drunk earlier, could feel the restrained power in his embrace. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, James rested his forehead against hers. "I can't offer you an easy life, Eleanor. This land is hard. The winters are brutal. There are days I barely break even. I don't want easy," Eleanor said firmly. "I want real. I want honest." She took a breath. "I want you." James's eyes searched hers, looking for doubt, for hesitation. Finding none, he kissed her again, slower this time, savoring. When he pulled back, his voice was husky. "I care about you, Eleanor, more than I thought I could care about anyone again. But I need to do this right, court you properly, give you time to be sure." "How much time?" Eleanor asked, a smile playing at her lips. "As much as you need," James said. "Though I'll warn you, I'm not a patient man by nature." "Neither am I," Eleanor admitted, and they both laughed softly. The courting that followed was sweet and stolen. Lingering glances across the breakfast table, hands brushing as they worked side by side. Evening walks where James would point out constellations, and Eleanor would share stories of her childhood before everything had fallen apart. He brought her wildflowers from the meadow, and she baked his favorite apple pie. They were building something together, brick by careful brick, but their fragile peace shattered 3 weeks later. Eleanor was in the garden when she heard horses approaching fast. She looked up to see 3 men riding hard toward the house, and her blood turned to ice. The man in the lead was Silas Blackwood, one of her father's creditors. A cruel man with cold eyes and a reputation for violence. "Well, well," Silas said, dismounting. "Little Eleanor Whitmore. Your daddy said you'd run west. Been tracking you for weeks." Eleanor backed toward the house. "I don't owe you anything. Your daddy owes me $5,000, Silas snarled. "Said I could have you instead. A deal's a deal." "That deal isn't legal," Eleanor said, her voice shaking. "You can't own a person." "Out here, girl. The law is what I say it is," Silas advanced. "Now you can come quiet, or we can do this the hard way. She's not going anywhere." James's voice cut through the tension like a knife. He stood in the barn doorway, rifle in hand, his expression deadly calm. "This isn't your business, rancher," Silas said, but his hand moved toward his gun. "She lives under my roof," James said, walking forward slowly. "That makes it my business. You're on my land without permission. I suggest you leave." 3 against 1, Silas pointed out. "Not good odds." "True," James agreed, "but I'm the one with the rifle already aimed, and I don't miss." His voice dropped, cold as winter. "I've got no problem putting down men who threaten women. Did it in the war. I'll do it again." Eleanor could see the calculation in Silas's eyes, weighing his options, measuring his chances. "She's not worth dying over," one of Silas's men muttered. $5,000 says she is, Silas spat. But he was backing toward his horse. "This isn't finished, Cartwright. "I'll be back with the sheriff, with papers. You do that," James said, "and I'll show him the letter Eleanor received from Howard, inviting her here as his intended bride. That makes her family by law. You'll leave empty-handed either way. Might as well save yourself the trouble." Silas mounted his horse, his face twisted with rage. "You haven't heard the last of this." "I'm counting on it," James said calmly. They watched the three men ride away, dust billowing behind them. Only when they disappeared over the rise did James lower the rifle. He turned to Eleanor, who was trembling, tears streaming down her face. "They'll come back," she said. "I've brought danger to your door. I should leave. You should come here," James said firmly, setting aside the rifle and pulling her into his arms. "You're not going anywhere, Eleanor. We face this together." "Together," Eleanor whispered against his chest, drawing strength from the word. "Together," James confirmed. "Always." That night, James insisted Eleanor sleep in his room while he kept watch. She protested, but he was immovable. "I won't sleep anyway," he said, "and I'll feel better knowing you're safe." Eleanor lay in his bed, surrounded by his scent, leather and sage, and something uniquely him. Despite her fear, exhaustion eventually claimed her. She woke to the sound of breaking glass. "James!" she screamed. He burst through the door, rifle raised, just as a flaming bottle crashed through the window. Fire spread across the wooden floor with terrifying speed. "Out the back!" James shouted, grabbing her hand. They ran through the smoke-filled house, James pausing only to grab a few essential items: his father's watch, the deed to the ranch, a small wooden box. They burst out the back door as flames engulfed the front of the house. In the yard stood Silas and his men, guns drawn. "Nowhere to run now, Cartwright," Silas said with a cruel smile. James pushed Eleanor behind him. "This is between you and me. Let her go." "Can't do that," Silas said. "But I'll make you a deal. Sign over your ranch, and I'll take the girl and leave you alive." "Never," James said. "Your choice," Silas shrugged, raising his gun. The shot rang out, but it wasn't from Silas's gun. It was from Eleanor's. She stood with James's pistol, the one he'd taught her to shoot during their lessons, smoke curling from the barrel. Her shot had struck Silas's gun hand, sending his weapon flying. "You taught me to shoot," Eleanor said, her voice steady despite her fear. "You taught me to protect what matters." Silas clutched his bleeding hand, his face contorted with rage and pain. His men started to reach for their weapons, but the sound of approaching horses stopped them. 6 riders appeared over the ridge, James's neighbors, alerted by the gunfire. "Problem here, James?" the lead rider called. He wore a sheriff's badge. "These men tried to kidnap Miss Whitmore and burned my house," James said. "I'd say that's a problem, Sheriff Dawson." "Silas Blackwood," the sheriff said with disgust. "Should have known. You're wanted in 3 territories. Boys, take these men into custody." As the sheriff's men rounded up Silas and his accomplices, Eleanor sagged against James, the pistol falling from her shaking hands. He caught her, holding her tight. "You saved my life," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "You've been saving mine since the day I arrived," Eleanor replied. They watched the house burn, knowing they'd lost everything material. But standing there in each other's arms, they realized they'd gained something far more valuable. The rebuilding took months. Neighbors came to help. A barn raising, but for a house. James and Eleanor worked side by side, hammering nails, fitting boards, creating something new from the ashes of what had been lost. One evening, as the sun painted the sky gold and crimson, James found Eleanor on the porch of their nearly finished home. He knelt beside her, taking her work-roughened hand in his. "Eleanor Whitmore, I'm not a man of fancy words," he said. "I'm a rancher with more debts than assets, more scars than smooth skin. But I love you. I love your strength, your courage, the way you've brought light back into my life. Will you marry me? Not as a mail-order bride, not out of necessity, but because you choose to, because you want to build this life with me." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears, happy ones this time. "Yes," she said. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." They married a week later in a simple ceremony at the church in Redemption. Eleanor wore a dress borrowed from James's neighbor, and James wore his best suit, the one he'd worn to Howard's funeral. But despite the borrowed and the sorrowful origins, everything felt new, full of promise. "You may kiss your bride," the minister said. James cupped Eleanor's face gently in his calloused hands and kissed her with all the love and hope he'd kept locked away for 3 long years. When they broke apart, both were smiling through tears. That night, in their new bedroom, in their rebuilt house, James was gentle as he helped Eleanor out of her wedding dress. "We can wait," he said, though his eyes were dark with want. "If you need more time." "I've waited long enough," Eleanor said, reaching up to unbutton his shirt. "I want this. I want you. I want our life together to truly begin." "Go slow if it hurts," James whispered as he laid her down on their wedding bed, his hands reverent on her skin. "Tell me if—" "You could never hurt me," Eleanor said with certainty. "You've only ever protected me, cherished me." "I'll die before I hurt you," James promised. And in his eyes, Eleanor saw not just desire, but devotion, not just passion, but profound respect. Their joining was tender and unhurried, a conversation without words, a promise sealed in touch and breath and whispered names. And when they finally lay tangled together, exhausted and complete, James pulled Eleanor close. "I see a woman worth saving," he murmured into her hair. "But the truth is, Eleanor, you saved me just as much as I saved you." "Then we're even," Eleanor said, smiling against his chest. "No," James corrected, kissing the top of her head. "We're better than even. We're together." "Together," Eleanor echoed, and the word held all the weight of a vow. The years that followed were not easy. The ranch struggled through droughts and harsh winters. There were cattle lost to disease, crops that failed, and bills that seemed impossible to pay. But James and Eleanor faced every challenge side by side, their love growing stronger with each test. 5 years after their wedding, Eleanor stood in the doorway of their home, expanded now, with an additional bedroom and a real kitchen, watching James teach their 4-year-old son, Robert, how to rope a fence post. Their daughter, Catherine, named for James's first wife, slept peacefully in her cradle nearby. James looked up and caught Eleanor watching. He smiled, that rare, genuine smile that he saved only for his family. And Eleanor's heart swelled with gratitude for the twists of fate that had brought her to this dusty Montana ranch, to this quiet, strong man who'd seen her as a person worth saving, when she'd seen herself as nothing more than a transaction. She'd come west as a mail-order bride, expecting duty and obligation. Instead, she'd found partnership, passion, and a love that had weathered every storm. "Mama, watch!" Robert called, successfully lassoing the post. "I'm watching, sweetheart," Eleanor called back, one hand resting on her swelling belly. Another child on the way. James walked over, wrapping his arms around her from behind, his hands covering hers over their unborn child. "Happy?" he asked. More than I ever thought possible, Eleanor replied honestly. Are you? Every single day, James said, turning her in his arms to kiss her properly, the way he'd been kissing her for 5 years, with passion, with tenderness, with a love that had conquered fear and pain and built something beautiful from the ruins of their separate pasts. In the distance, the Montana mountains stood eternal against the evening sky, and the land they'd fought so hard to keep stretched out before them, full of promise and possibility. They'd both been broken when they met, but together they'd become whole. And that was the greatest gift of all. The winter of 1875 came early and harsh to Montana. Snow fell in thick sheets, blanketing the ranch in white silence. Eleanor stood at the kitchen window, watching the storm rage outside while stirring a pot of stew. Catherine, now 3 years old, played with wooden blocks near the fireplace, and 7-year-old Robert sat at the table practicing his letters. The baby, Thomas, slept peacefully in his cradle. James hadn't returned from checking the cattle in the north pasture, and Eleanor's worry grew with each passing hour. He'd been gone since dawn, and the sun was already setting. What little of it could be seen through the blizzard. "Mommy, when's Papa coming home?" Robert asked, looking up from his slate. "Soon, sweetheart," Eleanor said, trying to keep the anxiety from her voice. "Your father knows these lands better than anyone." But as another hour passed with no sign of James, Eleanor made a decision. She bundled the children warmly and took them to their nearest neighbor, Martha Henderson, a widow who lived 2 miles south. "Stay with Mrs. Henderson," Eleanor instructed Robert. "Take care of your brother and sister. I'm going to find your father." "Eleanor, you can't go out in this," Martha protested. "It's suicide." "My husband is out there," Eleanor said firmly, strapping on James's spare gun belt and mounting Daisy, who was older now, but still reliable. "I won't lose him." She rode into the storm, following the path James would have taken. The wind whipped snow into her face, making it nearly impossible to see. But Eleanor had learned this land over the years, knew every rise and hollow. She pushed forward, calling James's name into the howling wind. After what felt like hours, she spotted something dark against the white, a horse, riderless, standing near a rocky outcrop. Her heart seized with fear. "James!" she screamed. A weak voice answered from below. "Eleanor!" She dismounted and carefully made her way to the edge of a shallow ravine. James lay at the bottom, his leg twisted at an unnatural angle, his face pale with pain and cold. "My horse spooked," he said through chattering teeth. "Threw me. Legs broken, I think." Eleanor didn't hesitate. She retrieved rope from her saddle and, with strength born of desperation, managed to fashion a harness. Using Daisy as an anchor, she slowly pulled James up the slope, ignoring the burning in her muscles and his groans of pain. "I've got you," she kept saying. "I've got you, James. Stay with me." Getting him onto Daisy was the hardest part. James was a large man, and his broken leg made mounting nearly impossible. But Eleanor refused to give up. She positioned him, pushed, pulled, and finally got him seated, then mounted behind him, holding him upright against her body. "Hold on to me," she commanded. "Don't you dare let go." The ride back was a nightmare. James drifted in and out of consciousness, his body growing colder. Eleanor talked to him constantly, refusing to let him slip away. "Remember our wedding night?" she said into his ear. "Remember how scared I was? You were so gentle, so patient. Remember the morning Robert was born? You held my hand for 12 hours, James. 12 hours. You didn't leave my side once." "Eleanor," he mumbled. "Love you. I love you too, she said fiercely, which is why you're going to stay awake. You're going to stay with me. We have 3 children who need their father. I need my husband. They made it to Martha's house just as Eleanor's strength was giving out. The women worked together to get James inside and onto a bed. Martha, who'd nursed her own husband through various injuries, examined James's leg. It's a clean break, she said, but it needs to be set properly, and he's suffering from exposure. We need the doctor. I'll go, Eleanor said, already standing. You can barely stand yourself, Martha argued. Then I'll crawl if I have to, Eleanor said. I didn't pull him out of that ravine to lose him now. She rode through the night to Redemption, fetched Dr. Morrison, and brought him back. The doctor set James's leg while he was unconscious, a mercy given the pain involved. He'll live, Dr. Morrison said finally. Thanks to you, Mrs. Cartwright. Another few hours in that cold and he didn't need to finish. Eleanor collapsed into a chair beside James's bed, taking his hand. She stayed there for 3 days, while the fever from his exposure ran its course, bathing his forehead with cool cloths, forcing water past his lips, refusing to leave his side. On the 4th day, James's eyes opened, clear and focused. Eleanor, he said, his voice rough. I'm here, she said, tears streaming down her face. I'm right here. You saved my life, he said, squeezing her hand weakly. We're even now, Eleanor said with a trembling smile, echoing their wedding night conversation. You saved me. I saved you. No, James said, pulling her closer with surprising strength. We save each other. That's what we do. That's what we'll always do. Eleanor leaned down and kissed him gently. Always, she agreed. 2 years passed, and James's leg healed, though he walked with a slight limp on cold days, a reminder of how close they'd come to tragedy. The ranch prospered. Word of Eleanor's courage during the blizzard had spread, and neighbors looked at her with new respect. She wasn't just James Cartwright's wife. She was a woman who'd faced death and won. But new challenges arose. A railroad company wanted to run a line through their property, offering what seemed like a generous sum. Many of their neighbors were selling, seeing an opportunity for wealth they'd never imagined. We could sell, James said one evening as they discussed the offer. Take the money, move somewhere easier. California, maybe. Somewhere warm. Eleanor looked around their home, the house they'd rebuilt together, the land they'd fought for, the life they'd created. Is that what you want? James was silent for a long moment. I want you to be happy, Eleanor. I want our children to have opportunities. This land, it's hard. It takes everything you have and asks for more, but it's ours, Eleanor said firmly. We bled for this land. We nearly died for it. And yes, it's hard, but it made us strong. It made us who we are. She took his hand. I'm not afraid of hard work, James. I'm only afraid of losing what matters. And this place matters. It's not just land, it's our legacy. James studied her face, seeing the determination there, the strength that had only grown over their years together. Then we tell the railroad, no. We tell them no, Eleanor agreed. The railroad wasn't pleased. Their representative, a slick man named Victor Brennan, began pressuring other landowners to sell, slowly isolating the Cartwright ranch. Supplies became harder to get. Buyers for their cattle suddenly weren't interested. It was economic warfare, and the Cartwrights felt the squeeze. We're going to lose everything if this continues, James said one night, reviewing their dwindling finances. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe we should reconsider. No, Eleanor said. We don't give in to bullies. We've faced worse than Victor Brennan. She was right, but that didn't make their situation less desperate. Then Eleanor had an idea. The other ranchers who refused to sell, she said, the Hendersons, the O'Malleys, the Torres family, They're all struggling too, aren't they? Yes, James confirmed. Brennan's squeezing all of us. Then we need to work together, Eleanor said. Pool our resources, create our own supply lines, our own markets. If we stand united, Brennan can't break us. James looked at his wife with open admiration. When did you become such a strategist? When I realized I had something worth fighting for, Eleanor said simply. She organized the ranchers, traveling from property to property, despite James's concerns for her safety. She was persuasive, passionate, and practical, showing them exact numbers, outlining plans, giving them hope. Mrs. Cartwright's right, Martha Henderson said at the meeting Eleanor called. We're stronger together than apart. The ranchers formed a cooperative, sharing resources and supporting each other. When one family's crops failed, the others helped. When the O'Malleys lost cattle to disease, the cooperative absorbed the loss together. And when Victor Brennan tried to intimidate them, they stood as one. Brennan tried everything: legal threats, economic pressure, even attempting to turn the ranchers against each other. But Eleanor's coalition held firm. Finally, Brennan played his last card. He claimed the Cartwright Ranch's deed was fraudulent, that James and Howard had never properly filed the paperwork when they'd claimed the land 15 years earlier. He produced documents, witnesses, and filed suit to seize the property. It's a lie, James said, his face pale as he read the legal papers. We filed everything properly. I have the deed. Then we fight, Eleanor said. We go to court. We prove he's lying. The trial became the talk of Montana Territory. Victor Brennan had money and lawyers. The Cartwrights had truth and community support. Day after day, Eleanor sat beside James in the courtroom, holding his hand, whispering encouragement. Brennan's lawyers were skilled, twisting facts, casting doubt on the Cartwrights' documentation. James's face grew grimmer with each day, but Eleanor refused to give up hope. Then, on the final day of testimony, an elderly man appeared in court, Samuel Whitfield, the land office clerk, who'd processed James and Howard's claim 15 years earlier. I registered their deed myself, Samuel testified, his voice shaking with age, but firm with conviction. I remember because it was the day my daughter was born. James Cartwright helped my wife get to the doctor when I was stuck at the office. I'd never forget that kindness. He pulled out a worn ledger, and I kept my personal records. Here's the entry, dated and notarized. Brennan's case collapsed. The judge ruled in favor of the Cartwrights, and furthermore, fined Brennan heavily for attempting to defraud the court. Outside the courthouse, Eleanor and James held each other, tears of relief streaming down their faces. We did it, James said. We actually did it. Of course we did, Eleanor said, smiling through her tears. We're together, remember? There's nothing we can't face together. The summer of 1880 brought new joy to the Cartwright Ranch. Their eldest, Robert, now 12, was becoming a skilled horseman and rancher. Catherine, 8 years old, had her mother's determination and her father's quiet strength. Thomas, 5, was full of mischief and laughter. And now, Eleanor was pregnant with their 4th child. You sure you can handle another one? James teased, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. I've handled worse than childbirth, Eleanor reminded him. I've handled you. James laughed, a sound that had become more common over the years. Fair point. But this pregnancy was different. Eleanor felt weaker than before, more tired. Dr. Morrison, now a close family friend, examined her with concern. The baby's fine, he assured James. But Eleanor needs to rest. No heavy work, no stress. James became fiercely protective, taking over Eleanor's usual chores, hiring help for the house, and insisting she spend most of her time resting. Eleanor chafed at the restrictions, but recognized the fear in her husband's eyes, the same fear he'd carried since losing Catherine, his first wife, to childbirth. "I'm not her," Eleanor said gently one evening. "I'm strong, James. I'll be fine." "You're carrying our child," James said, his voice rough. "You're the center of my world, Eleanor. If something happened to you—" He couldn't finish. "Nothing will happen to me," Eleanor promised. "I have too much to live for." The labor came a month early, sudden and fierce. James rode for the doctor, while Martha Henderson stayed with Eleanor. But the baby wasn't waiting. Catherine, mature beyond her 8 years, helped boil water and fetch clean linens, while Robert kept Thomas distracted outside. "I can see the head," Martha said. "Eleanor, you need to push." Eleanor pushed with all her strength, her hand gripping Catherine's small one. "I love you, sweetheart," she gasped to her daughter between contractions. "You're so brave." "You're brave, Mama," Catherine said, tears streaming down her young face. "You're the bravest person I know." The baby came fast, a daughter, small but healthy, with a powerful set of lungs. Martha cleaned and swaddled her just as James burst through the door with Dr. Morrison. "Eleanor," James said, his face pale with fear. "I'm fine," Eleanor said, exhausted but smiling, holding their new daughter. "We're both fine. Come meet your daughter." James approached slowly, as if afraid he was dreaming. When he took the baby in his large, calloused hands, tears rolled down his cheeks. "She's perfect." "What should we name her?" Eleanor asked. James looked at Martha, who'd helped deliver 3 of their 4 children, who'd been there through every crisis, who'd become family. "Martha," he said, "if you don't mind." Martha Henderson, the tough widow who'd survived 2 decades alone on the frontier, broke down sobbing. "I'd be honored." Little Martha Cartwright became the darling of the ranch, doted on by her older siblings and adored by her parents. But Eleanor's recovery was slow. Morrison took James aside one evening. "She needs more help," he said quietly. "Her body's been through a lot. 4 children, that fever she fought when you were injured, all the hard work. She's strong, but she's not invincible." James hired 2 women from town to help with the house and the children. Eleanor protested at first, but she couldn't deny her exhaustion. She spent her days in a rocking chair on the porch, baby Martha in her arms, watching her other children play and her husband work the land they'd fought so hard to keep. "I feel useless," she confessed to James one evening. "You're not useless," James said firmly, kneeling beside her chair. "You're healing. You're feeding our daughter. You're the reason this family exists, Eleanor. Everything I do for you. So let me take care of you for a change." "You always take care of me," Eleanor said softly. "And I always will," James promised. "In sickness and in health, remember?" Those words meant something. Slowly, Eleanor regained her strength. By the time Martha was 6 months old, Eleanor was back to managing the household, though she'd learned to accept help and delegate. She'd learned that strength wasn't just about doing everything yourself. It was also about building a community, accepting support, and knowing when to rest. The spring of 1883 brought an unexpected visitor. A woman arrived in a fancy carriage, dressed in the height of Philadelphia fashion. Silk dress, elaborate hat, gloved hands. She looked wildly out of place on the dusty Montana ranch. Eleanor was in the garden when the carriage pulled up. She straightened, shading her eyes, wondering who this could be. Then the woman stepped down, removed her hat, and Eleanor gasped. "Margaret," she whispered. It was her sister, younger by 3 years, someone Eleanor hadn't seen since fleeing Philadelphia 14 years earlier. Someone she'd thought she might never see again. "Hello, Eleanor," Margaret said, tears already streaming down her perfect face. "I found you." The sisters embraced, both crying, years of separation melting away in that moment. Eleanor pulled back, studying Margaret's face. "How did you find me? Why did you come?" "Father died 6 months ago," Margaret said. "When I was going through his papers, I found letters. Letters you'd sent to Mother before she passed, but he'd intercepted them. I found your address, and I had to see you, had to know if you were alive and well." Eleanor led Margaret into the house, suddenly seeing their modest home through Philadelphia society eyes. The rough furniture, the simple decorations, the worn but clean floors. But Margaret didn't seem to notice or care. "You have a beautiful home," Margaret said, sincerely. "And I saw children outside. Are they?" "Mine," Eleanor confirmed proudly. "I have 4. Robert, Catherine, Thomas, and baby Martha. 4 children," Margaret repeated wonderingly. "And a husband?" "The best man I've ever known," Eleanor said. "He should be back soon. You'll meet him." As if summoned, James appeared in the doorway, dusty from work, freezing when he saw the well-dressed stranger. Eleanor rushed to his side. "James, this is my sister Margaret. Margaret, this is my husband, James Cartwright." James, always protective of Eleanor, studied Margaret carefully before offering his hand. "Ma'am, any sister of Eleanor's is welcome in our home." Margaret took his hand, then surprised them both by saying, "Thank you for taking care of my sister. I can see that you have." Her eyes filled with tears again. "I worried every day for 14 years, not knowing if she was alive or dead." Over the following days, the sisters reconnected. Margaret had never married, choosing instead to manage the family's remaining assets after their father's death. She'd come west not just to find Eleanor, but to escape the emptiness of her own life. "I envy you," Margaret confessed one evening as they watched the sunset. "You have love, children, purpose. I have money and society parties, and nothing that matters." "You could stay," Eleanor said impulsively. "There's plenty of room. We could use help with the children, and you'd be doing me the greatest favor of my life," Margaret finished. "But Eleanor, I wouldn't want to impose." "Family doesn't impose," Eleanor said firmly. "They belong." Margaret stayed, trading silk dresses for practical calico, learning to cook and clean and garden. She was a natural with children, especially little Martha, who adored her aunt. And slowly, Margaret bloomed like a flower that had been kept in darkness, finally finding sun. One evening, Eleanor found James and Margaret talking on the porch. Margaret was laughing at something James had said, a rare occurrence in itself. And James looked more relaxed than Eleanor had seen him in months. "Your sister's good people," James told Eleanor later in bed. "Different from what I expected. She was trapped like I was," Eleanor said. "Just in a different kind of prison. But she's free now. We both are." "Thanks to each other," James said, pulling Eleanor close. "You saved me from my grief. I saved you from your past. Now we're saving Margaret from her loneliness. That's what family does." "That's what love does," Eleanor corrected, kissing him softly. 6 months later, Eleanor wasn't entirely surprised when Margaret began spending more time with their neighbor, Michael O'Malley, a widower with 2 young children who'd been part of Eleanor's Ranchers Cooperative. What did surprise her was how happy it made her feel, watching her sister discover the same kind of love Eleanor had found. "Do you think Margaret will marry Mr. O'Malley?" Catherine asked one day as they watched Margaret and Michael talking by the fence. "I think," Eleanor said, smiling, "that love has a way of finding people who are ready for it." And she was right. Margaret and Michael married that autumn in a ceremony that brought the whole community together. As Eleanor watched her sister pledge her life to a good man, watched her step into the same kind of partnership and purpose that had transformed Eleanor's own life, she felt a deep sense of completion. 2 sisters who'd been separated by fear and cruelty had found each other again. And more than that, they'd both found love, purpose, and belonging in the wild Montana territory that had seemed so foreign and frightening all those years ago. The winter of 1888 tested the Cartwrights one final time. An influenza epidemic swept through Montana, killing young and old alike. The Cartwright children fell ill one by one. First Thomas, then Catherine, then Robert. Baby Martha, now 8 years old and not so much a baby anymore, stayed healthy, helping her mother tend to her sick siblings. Dr. Morrison was overwhelmed with patients, doing what he could, but admitting there was little medicine could do against the flu. "Keep them warm, keep them hydrated, and pray," he told Eleanor and James. For 2 weeks, Eleanor barely slept. She moved from bed to bed, cooling fevers, forcing water and broth past cracked lips, reading stories in hoarse whispers, singing lullabies until her voice gave out. James worked the ranch alone during the day and spelled Eleanor at night, sitting vigil over their children. Thomas, at 13, recovered first, his young body fighting off the illness with the resilience of youth. Catherine, 16 now and strong-willed like her mother, followed. But Robert, at 20 years old and the eldest, hovered on the edge of death for days. "Fight," Eleanor whispered to her firstborn son, gripping his burning hand. "You're a Cartwright. We don't give up. We never give up." James sat on Robert's other side, his face haggard with fear and exhaustion. "Listen to your mother, son. She brought me back from the edge. She'll bring you back, too." On the 14th night, Robert's fever broke. Eleanor collapsed in James's arms, sobbing with relief. "They're all gonna be okay," James said, holding her tight. "Thanks to you. You saved them all." "We saved them all," Eleanor corrected. "Together." But the epidemic had taken its toll on Eleanor. She'd pushed her body beyond its limits, and now she paid the price. She developed a fever of her own, a cough that rattled deep in her chest. "No," James said when Dr. Morrison confirmed pneumonia. "No, Eleanor, you have to fight this. You have to." "I will," Eleanor said, though her voice was weak. "I have too much to live for, remember?" James became a man possessed. He barely left her side, doing everything she'd done for their children and more. He bathed her fever-hot skin with cool cloths, held her when coughing fits seized her body, prayed to a God he'd rarely spoken to before. "Don't leave me," he whispered one night when her breathing became labored. "Eleanor, please, I can't do this without you." Eleanor's eyes fluttered open. Even weak and ill, her gaze was fierce. "Then, good thing you won't have to," she gasped between breaths. "Not finished yet, James, not nearly finished." The children took turns sitting with their mother. Robert, still recovering himself, read to her from her favorite books. Catherine brushed and braided her mother's hair, the way Eleanor had done for her when she was small. Thomas told jokes and stories, desperate to make his mother smile. And young Martha simply held her hand, silent and steady. Margaret came every day, bringing food, helping with the house, spelling James at Eleanor's bedside. "You married a stubborn woman, James," she said one evening. "She's not going to let something as insignificant as pneumonia stop her." "I know," James said, managing a weak smile. "It's one of the things I love most about her." On the 7th day, Eleanor's fever broke. On the 10th day, she was sitting up and eating solid food. On the 14th day, she walked, shakily but determinedly, out to the porch to see the ranch she'd fought so hard to help build and protect. "Welcome back," James said, his arm around her waist, supporting her weight. "Good to be back," Eleanor said, breathing in the cold, clean Montana air. "How's the ranch?" "Still standing," James said. "Like you, like all of us." Eleanor looked out at the land she'd come to love. The rolling grassland, the distant mountains, the barn and corrals, the life they'd built together against all odds. "We've faced a lot, haven't we?" she said quietly. "Everything life could throw at us." James agreed. "And we're still here, still together." "Always together," Eleanor said, leaning into her husband's solid warmth. The spring of 1889 brought a celebration. Robert, fully recovered and now a man of 21, was getting married to Sarah Henderson, Martha's granddaughter. The wedding brought the whole community together, all the families who'd stood with the Cartwrights through the railroad fight, through the epidemic, through 15 years of partnership and mutual support. Eleanor, now 47 years old with silver threading through her auburn hair, watched her son marry the woman he loved. She held James's hand, calloused and scarred from decades of ranch work, but still strong. Still the hand that had first offered her safety and respect all those years ago. "Remember our wedding?" James murmured in her ear. "Every detail," Eleanor said. "You were terrified." "I was terrified I'd let you down," James corrected, "that I couldn't give you the life you deserved." Eleanor turned to face her husband, cupping his weathered face in her hands. "James Cartwright, you gave me everything I deserved and more. You gave me love, respect, partnership. You gave me 4 beautiful children. You gave me a life worth living." "We gave each other that," James said, kissing her softly. "And we're not done yet, Mrs. Cartwright. We've got grandchildren to meet, more years to share. Many more years," Eleanor agreed. As the wedding celebration continued around them, children laughing, neighbors dancing, food and joy in abundance, Eleanor reflected on the journey that had brought her here. She'd arrived in Montana as a frightened mail-order bride with nothing but a carpet bag and desperation. She'd been prepared to trade her grandmother's locket for a meal, ready to marry a stranger just to survive. Instead, she'd found a man who'd seen her as a person, not property, who'd given her time and space to heal, who'd taught her to be strong, who'd stood beside her through every challenge. Together they'd built not just a ranch, but a legacy of courage, of community, of love that conquered fear. "What are you thinking about?" James asked, noticing her faraway expression. "That I was right," Eleanor said. "That night on the porch, when I admitted what I wanted. My desire to build a life with you was greater than my fear. And it was the best decision I ever made." "Second best," James corrected with a rare smile. "The best decision was mine, letting you stay, opening my heart again, taking a chance on love when I'd sworn I never would." "Then we both made the best decision," Eleanor said. "Together, always together, James echoed. And as the sun set over the Montana mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and purple, James and Eleanor Cartwright stood hand in hand, surrounded by the family and community they'd built, living proof that love could bloom even in the harshest soil, that broken people could heal each other, and that sometimes the greatest adventures began with the smallest acts of courage and kindness. The young mail-order bride who'd been modest before everyone had discovered that her desire for love, for purpose, for a life truly lived, was greater than any obstacle in her path. And she'd found it all with a quiet, strong man who'd taught her that true partnership meant facing everything life offered together. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're enjoying this tale from. Are you listening at home, during your commute, or perhaps while working? Please subscribe to the From Wild West channel and share your thoughts in the comments below. What did you think of Eleanor and James's journey? Your feedback means the world to us.